If you've been waiting months or even years for your green card priority date to become current, and you're frantically refreshing government websites hoping to see movement in the January 2026 visa bulletin, I know exactly how you're feeling right now. The uncertainty, the anxiety of not knowing when your number will finally be called, the frustration of watching dates move forward 1 month and then backward the next, or sometimes not move at all for what feels like forever. Maybe you've been separated from family members. Maybe you've been stuck in the same job, unable to make career moves because of your immigration status. Or maybe you're just exhausted from the endless waiting with no clear timeline for when your life can finally move forward. I want you to know that your feelings are completely valid, and today I'm going to walk you through everything you need to understand about how the visa bulletin actually works, what we can reasonably expect for priority date movement in January 2026 based on historical patterns and current data, and most importantly, how to interpret this information so you can make informed decisions about your situation rather than getting caught up in speculation and rumors that are flooding social media right now. Before we dive into predictions for the January 2026 Visa Bulletin, I need to make sure we're all on the same page about what the Visa Bulletin actually is and how it functions, because there's a tremendous amount of misunderstanding about this, and that misunderstanding leads to unnecessary panic and false hope. The Visa Bulletin is published monthly by the U.S. Department of State, and it shows the priority dates that are currently being processed for family-sponsored and employment-based immigrant visa categories. Your priority date is essentially your place in line for a green card. For employment-based cases, your priority date is typically the date your labor certification was filed or the date your I-140 immigrant petition was filed if labor certification wasn't required. For family-sponsored cases, your priority date is the date your qualifying relative filed the I-130 petition on your behalf. The reason we have a visa bulletin and priority date system at all is because U.S. immigration law places annual numerical limits on how many immigrant visas can be issued in each category and for each country. Employment-based immigration has approximately 140,000 visas available each fiscal year, divided among 5 preference categories. Family-sponsored immigration has approximately 226,000 visas available annually, divided among 4 preference categories. These numbers include derivatives, meaning spouses and children of the principal applicant. Additionally, there's a per-country limit that states no single country can receive more than 7% of the total available visas in any category. This per-country limit is what creates the massive backlogs for countries like India, China, Mexico, and the Philippines, where demand far exceeds the available visa numbers. The Visa Bulletin contains 2 different charts for each category: the final action dates chart and the dates for filing chart. This is where a lot of confusion happens, so pay close attention. The final action dates chart, which used to be called simply the Visa Bulletin chart, shows the priority dates for cases that can actually receive their immigrant visa or adjust status to permanent residence this month. If your priority date is before the date shown in the final action dates chart for your category and country, and all other requirements are met, you can receive your green card. The dates for filing chart, which was introduced more recently, shows priority dates for applicants who can submit their adjustment of status application, Form I-485 if they're in the United States, but they cannot yet receive final approval. The purpose of the dates for filing chart is to allow people to get into the queue earlier, obtain work authorization and travel documents while they wait, and help USCIS manage their workload more efficiently. Here's something critical that causes confusion every single month. U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services decides each month whether they will accept applications based on the dates for filing chart or whether they will only use the final action dates chart. This decision is announced in the visa bulletin itself, and it can change from month to month. Even if the dates for filing chart shows your priority date is current, if USCIS announces they are not accepting applications based on that chart for your category, you cannot file yet. You must wait until your priority date becomes current under the final action dates chart, or until USCIS announces they will accept applications under the dates for filing chart. This is not optional, and sending in an application when you're not eligible will result in rejection and wasted fees. Now let's talk about what determines how priority dates move from month to month, because understanding this will help you make sense of predictions and manage your expectations. Priority date movement is not random, and it's not based on political decisions or policy changes in most cases. It's based on a mathematical calculation of visa supply and demand. Each month, the Department of State looks at how many visas are available for each category and country, and they look at how many applicants with earlier priority dates are ready to complete the process. They set the cutoff dates based on keeping the flow of cases moving without exceeding the annual numerical limits. This is why priority dates sometimes move forward significantly, sometimes move forward slowly, sometimes don't move at all, and occasionally even retrogress, meaning they move backward. When priority dates retrogress, it's because more demand materialized than expected, and the State Department needs to slow down processing to avoid running out of visa numbers before the end of the fiscal year. The U.S. government's fiscal year runs from October 1st through September 30th, and visa bulletin movement often follows predictable patterns based on where we are in the fiscal year. Early in the fiscal year, from October through about March, priority dates often see more significant movement because the full year's allocation of visa numbers is available, and adjudicators are trying to work through the backlog efficiently. As we get closer to the end of the fiscal year, particularly from July through September, movement tends to slow down, or dates can even retrogress, because the State Department needs to be careful not to issue more visas than are legally available. They cannot roll over unused visas to the next year in most cases, and they cannot exceed the cap, so they have to manage the numbers carefully as the year progresses. Looking at where we are right now, January 2026 falls in the middle of fiscal year 2026, which began on October 1st, 2025. At this point in the fiscal year, we typically see moderate but steady priority date movement in categories that aren't severely backlogged. However, we need to look at what happened in the preceding months of this fiscal year to understand what's likely for January. The October 2025 Visa Bulletin, which was the first bulletin of fiscal year 2026, would have shown us the initial positioning. The November and December bulletins would have shown us the early fiscal year movement patterns. Unfortunately, predicting exact priority date movement for any specific month is not an exact science, because it depends on variables that aren't fully public, including how many cases at earlier priority dates are actually documentarily qualified and ready to be processed, how many visa numbers were used in the previous month, and what demand projections the State Department is working with. However, we can make educated predictions based on historical trends and current patterns. For employment-based categories, let's start with EB1. The first preference for priority workers, including individuals with extraordinary ability, outstanding professors and researchers, and multinational executives and managers. Historically, EB1 has been current or nearly current for most countries except India and China. In recent years, even EB1, India and China have experienced backlogs due to increased demand. For January 2026, if EB1 has been current or moving steadily in recent months, we can expect either continued currency or modest forward movement. If there has been retrogression, January might show stabilization or slight improvement, as we're still early enough in the fiscal year that visa numbers are available. The key factor for EB1 is that it receives the highest priority for visa number allocation, so movement tends to be more favorable than lower preference categories. EB2, the second preference for professionals with advanced degrees or exceptional ability, is where we see some of the most severe backlogs, particularly for India and China. EB2 India has historically faced decades-long wait times due to the combination of high demand and the per-country cap. EB2 China also faces multi-year backlogs, though generally not as severe as India. For other countries, EB2 movement can be more favorable. Looking at historical patterns for January bulletins, EB2 India might see movement of anywhere from a few weeks to a couple of months, depending on how aggressive the State Department is willing to be at this point in the fiscal year. EB2 China typically sees similar patterns. For rest of world EB2, meaning countries other than India and China, January could potentially show current status or dates within the current year, depending on overall demand levels. EB3, the third preference for skilled workers, professionals, and other workers, presents an interesting situation. For many years, EB3 India was actually moving faster than EB2 India due to the way visa numbers are allocated between categories. This created a phenomenon called downgrading, where people with approved EB2 petitions would file EB3 petitions to get their green cards faster. However, this dynamic can shift based on demand in each category. For January 2026, EB3 India movement will depend heavily on how much demand is in the pipeline. We might see movement of a few weeks to a couple of months. EB3 China typically follows similar patterns. EB3 for rest of world countries often remains current or shows dates within a year or two of the present. EB4 and EB5 are more specialized categories with their own unique dynamics. EB4 is for special immigrants, including religious workers and certain other categories. EB5 is the investor category, which has its own complex set of rules and has undergone recent reforms. These categories typically affect fewer people than EB1 through EB3, and predictions are highly dependent on the specific subcategory and country. For family-sponsored categories, the dynamics are somewhat different. F1 is for unmarried adult sons and daughters of U.S. citizens. F2A is for spouses and minor children of lawful permanent residents. F2B is for unmarried adult sons and daughters of permanent residents. F3 is for married sons and daughters of U.S. citizens. F4 is for siblings of adult U.S. citizens. Among these categories, F2A typically receives the most favorable treatment and is often current or nearly current because spouses and minor children of permanent residents are considered a higher priority. The other categories, particularly F3 and F4, can have very long wait times, sometimes exceeding 20 years for countries like Mexico and the Philippines. For January 2026 family-sponsored predictions, F2A will likely remain current or show minimal retrogression depending on demand. F1, F2B, F3, and F4 for high-demand countries like Mexico, Philippines, India, and China will likely show modest forward movement measured in weeks or a few months at most. These categories move slowly because the backlogs are so substantial and the annual visa allocations are limited. Now, I need to be very clear about something important. Everything I've just discussed are predictions based on historical patterns and general understanding of how the visa bulletin system works. These are not official announcements and they are not guarantees. The actual January 2026 Visa Bulletin will be published by the Department of State typically in the second week of December 2025, and that official bulletin is the only source you should rely on for making actual decisions about your case. Predictions can be wrong. Unexpected changes in demand, policy adjustments, processing capacity issues, or other factors can cause actual movement to be significantly different from predictions. This brings me to an important warning about information you see online. Social media, immigration forums, and various websites are filled with predictions, speculation, and sometimes outright misinformation about Visa Bulletin movement. Some people share predictions based on nothing more than wishful thinking. Others misunderstand the data and spread incorrect information. Some deliberately create sensational predictions to drive traffic to their websites or videos. You need to be extremely careful about what information you trust and how you act on it. Basing major life decisions on unreliable Visa Bulletin predictions can lead to serious problems. Here's what you should actually do if you're waiting for your priority date to become current. First, check the official Visa Bulletin each month as soon as it's published. The official source is the U.S. Department of State's Visa Bulletin page on their website. Don't rely on screenshots, summaries, or interpretations from other sources until you've looked at the official bulletin yourself. Second, understand which chart applies to your situation. If you're adjusting status in the United States, check both the final action dates and the dates for filing, and check the USCIS announcement about which chart they're accepting applications under. If you're processing through consular processing abroad, only the final action dates chart matters for you. Third, stay in regular contact with your immigration attorney if you have one. If you don't have an attorney and your case is straightforward, make sure you understand the process for what happens when your priority date becomes current. You don't want to miss your opportunity because you didn't know what forms to file or what documents to prepare. Fourth, start preparing your documents well before your priority date becomes current. Getting medical examinations, police certificates, financial documents, and other required materials can take time, and you don't want delays once you're eligible to move forward. Fifth, monitor your case status and respond immediately to any requests from USCIS or the National Visa Center. Missing deadlines or failing to respond to requests for evidence can cause serious delays or even denial of your application. Sixth, keep your contact information updated with USCIS or NVC. If they can't reach you, your case can be delayed or closed. If your priority date has been stuck for years with little or no movement, I understand how discouraging and frustrating that is. Unfortunately, there's no magic solution to speed up priority dates that are constrained by statutory visa number limitations. The backlog exists because U.S. immigration law sets numerical caps that are far below actual demand, particularly for certain countries. The only ways to truly fix this would be for Congress to pass legislation increasing the visa numbers, eliminating or raising per-country caps, or creating new categories. Various bills have been proposed over the years to address employment-based and family-based backlogs, but as of now, no comprehensive reform has passed that would dramatically change the situation. What you can do is make sure you're in the correct category and that your case is properly positioned. Sometimes people are in a less favorable category when they could qualify for a better one. For example, if you're in EB3 and you've since obtained an advanced degree or additional qualifications, you might be able to file an EB2 petition and potentially see faster movement depending on current trends. If you're in EB2 and your EB3 dates are moving faster, you might consider that option. These decisions are complex and highly individual, so they require consultation with an experienced immigration attorney who can analyze your specific situation. Another option for some people is to explore whether you qualify for any category that might have better priority dates. If you have extraordinary ability in your field, EB1A might be an option. If your employer is willing to support it and you qualify, EB1C for multinational executives could be faster. These options aren't available to everyone, but they're worth exploring if you're facing a very long wait in your current category. For family-based cases, one significant option is that if you're waiting in F2A as the spouse or minor child of a permanent resident, your wait time would be eliminated entirely if your permanent resident spouse naturalizes to become a U.S. citizen. Spouses and minor children of U.S. citizens are considered immediate relatives, which means they're not subject to numerical caps or priority dates. They can immigrate as soon as their I-130 petition is approved and they complete the required processing. If your permanent resident family member is eligible for naturalization, this could dramatically speed up your case. I also want to address the emotional and psychological toll of waiting for years in immigration limbo. This is incredibly difficult, and it's not talked about enough. The uncertainty affects your ability to plan your life, make career decisions, sometimes even decide whether to start a family or where to live. If you're separated from family members who are waiting abroad, the pain of that separation is real and valid. Please know that feeling frustrated, angry, sad, or anxious about this situation is completely normal. Seek support from friends, family, community, or professional counseling if the stress becomes overwhelming. Your mental health matters, and you're not alone in struggling with this. Looking ahead to the rest of fiscal year 2026, we can expect continued priority date movement in most categories, with the pace depending on visa number availability and demand levels. As we move into the spring months of 2026, we should see continued moderate advancement. Summer months, particularly August and September, may see slowdowns or retrogression as the State Department manages remaining visa numbers for the fiscal year. Then, October 2026 will bring the new fiscal year and a fresh allocation of visa numbers, which typically brings renewed movement. Remember that Visa Bulletin predictions are just that, predictions. They're based on analysis of historical patterns and current trends, but they cannot account for unexpected changes. The official bulletin published by the Department of State is always the authoritative source. Plan based on official information, not speculation. If you have questions about your specific priority date, your category, or what you should be doing while you wait, I encourage you to share those questions in the comments below. I read every comment and I'll do my best to provide general guidance, although please remember that nothing I say here or in the comments constitutes personal legal advice for your individual situation. For specific advice about your case, you need to consult with a licensed immigration attorney who can review your complete circumstances. If you found this analysis helpful and you want to stay informed about Visa Bulletin updates, priority date predictions, and important changes in U.S. immigration policy and procedure, make sure you subscribe to USA Visa today. We're committed to providing you with accurate, factual, non-sensational information that you can actually use to understand your immigration journey. Share this information with friends or family members who are also waiting for priority dates to become current, because accurate information helps everyone make better decisions. Leave a comment telling me which category and country you're waiting in, how long you've been waiting, and what questions you have about the January 2026 Visa Bulletin or priority date movement in general. Your questions help me create content that addresses what you actually need to know. Thank you for watching. And remember, waiting is incredibly hard, but understanding the system and staying informed gives you more control over the parts of this process that you can control.